Let's read. Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, and the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. The wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up. This command I received from my Father. The Jews who heard these words but were again divided. Many of them said, he is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? But others said, these are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Well, here in John chapter 10, we have perhaps Jesus' most famous metaphor that he uses to describe himself. I am the good shepherd. And did you notice in the passage there, it says Jesus used this figure of speech. And some people didn't understand, but it is a metaphor. And just to take you back to my memory of year 10 English, yes, it was year 10 when I learnt this, a simile is when you say that something's like something else. I remember from the textbook, the hose is like a snake coiled up. But a metaphor is when you say the thing is something that it's not because it is strikingly similar, but it's not actually a thing, but you say that it is. The hose is a snake coiled up, ready to trip me over or something like that. And Jesus uses a metaphor and he says something that he is not because it's so strikingly similar to what he is. Jesus, though, he says he's a shepherd. He's never made any money from selling sheep, and he really doesn't think too much about the crimp density of the wool of various sheep that go past, or the weight and the value of of wool at any certain time, because he's not actually a shepherd, and yet it's right for him to use a metaphor and say, I am the good shepherd. Because sometimes direct speech, where you don't use figures and pictures and illustrations, sometimes direct speech is just not enough to capture the truth. Or sometimes you can't see what's going on the inside, and so you use a metaphor, like we did just out there. We use a metaphor of image, baptism, or a metaphor of language, I'm the shepherd, in order to say what's going on where you can't see. And Jesus uses a metaphor and says, I am the good shepherd. John, in his gospel, John was one of the eyewitnesses who followed Jesus around, and John chooses to record some things that the other gospel writers didn't record. John chooses to record and retell to us many of the metaphors that Jesus used. So remember, throughout John's gospel, in chapter 6, for example, Jesus says, I am the bread of life. In chapter 8, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. In chapter 10, Jesus says, I am the gate. We just heard that read. And I am the good shepherd. Just heard that read. In chapter 11, he'll say, I am the resurrection. In chapter 14, he'll say, I am the way, the path, literally. And in chapter 15, he'll say, I am the true vine. Jesus wants you to know the truth that you can't see, that is true between you and him. And so he uses these metaphors. And today we're going to look at this metaphor of I am the good shepherd. And it's the perfect metaphor almost. It's almost the perfect metaphor because it's just so clear immediately, isn't it? A shepherd with sheep following it. Jesus is saying he leads you and he will care for you. It's so clear, so quickly, isn't it, in your mind? You see a picture of a guy or a girl with a stick or two, and there's sheep being looked after by the shepherd. And Jesus says, you and me, the deal between us, I am the good shepherd. It's almost the perfect metaphor because it's an image for anyone and any time. You and I can just get it. But it's a particularly good metaphor in the context of the Jewish Old Testament, where I was going to say some of, but most of the key figures are shepherds. Like literally they look after the sheep. They do make money off selling sheep, and they do care a lot about the crimp. I can't remember the phrase for it, but you know, the wool has a crimp in it and you want high crimp to centimetre ratio. Crimp per inch, that's what it is. They care about those things because they're actual shepherds. And so Abraham, the first of God's people called to belong to God, he was a shepherd. It doesn't say that, but it says that he kept sheep. And so I'm joining the dots there. Call me speculative, but he kept sheep. Jacob, also not called a shepherd, but his wife Rachel was called a shepherd, a shepherdess, it says in Genesis. David, who became a mighty king and Messiah, Savior, Christ of Israel, was a shepherd. And Moses, who should go before David really, Moses too was a shepherd in Egypt. No, yes, in the hill country. And so this is a figure that makes sense if you've been reading the Old Testament, not just because the key figures are shepherds from your memory, but also because God has presented himself to his people in the Old Testament as a shepherd. And it is, as I said before, an almost perfect metaphor, particularly in Genesis chapter 48, verse 15. Jacob, whose name is Israel, confusing, is praying or blessing his son Joseph. And he says in verse 15, may the God before whom my fathers Abraham, Isaac walked faithfully, the God who's been my shepherd all my life to this day, may he bless these boys. Lovely little prayer for his grandsons, I think it is. And he's the first one in the Bible, way back in Genesis, to refer to God as a shepherd. And so, again, almost a perfect metaphor. And thirdly, not only were there lots of shepherds in the Old Testament, not only is God pictured as a shepherd, Psalm 23 as well, the Lord is my shepherd, says King David, who was a shepherd, but also the leaders of God's people, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, are referred to as shepherds of God's people. And so you can see in Ezekiel chapter 4, God is actually speaking against the shepherds of Israel, the leaders of Israel, for being bad shepherds and not looking after the people properly, not leading them to the right things and taking from them instead of giving to them. And in Jeremiah 3, it also talks about leaders as shepherds. And so it's almost the perfect metaphor. And I've blabbed on for too long now already. And I hope with my blabbing or just kind of giving you some details, you haven't missed the clarity of Jesus. He says he is the good shepherd. He is calling you to follow him as leader, as the one who will guide. And actually, let me pull out 3 different pieces for you of the way that he will lead his people, this Jesus. Firstly, Jesus is shepherd in terms of his provenance. Verses 1 to 2 say this, very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. Jesus is saying there's a sheep pen, there's a gate. The guy that walks in the front gate is the shepherd. The person that climbs over the fence in the middle of the night, that's a thief or a robber. And he's setting up a picture of how in life there's all sorts of different claims of leadership and claims of who to follow in the world. In this context of chapter 9 and 10, he's particularly, I suspect, referring to the Pharisees. Actually, this whole speech is referring to the Pharisees. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, is verse 1, who just in chapter 9, the previous chapter, have been spiritually blind, to use Jesus' words. There was a blind man who can see who Jesus is, and there's sighted Pharisees who are blind spiritually to what is going on, and they are not looking after the people. They're leading people away from the goodness of God instead of to the goodness of God. And so there's the immediate context here of John 9, where there's blind guides, blind Pharisees, blind shepherds, who are stealing from the sheep. But in all of our lives, there will be claims for leadership and people to follow. Now, I can give you some of the kind of cliche ones, throwaway lines like influencers are trying to influence you and lead you somewhere, but we all see influences coming, and yet aren't we influenced by the media and by advertising to dress the way that we dress and to want the things that we want? And so actually we are led by the influences of the world. Maybe not the ones that you can pull apart quickly, but there's all sorts of influence that goes on through the media and advertising of us. We could also think about the influence of our parents or the government, and different governments around the world will seek more or less influence, but all will seek to influence us. And different parents, some healthy and some unhealthy, seek to influence us, but there is a time when we come out from the influence of our parents and we are not led. But, I could throw mud at influencers and parents all day long, and your boss, who probably wants more of you than they should want and demands more of you than they should. All these leaders that I want to say, don't be led by them. They're trying to rob from you. You should be led by Jesus. But I'm going to push just a little deeper first and say, I think in Australia, our culture is mainly to be led by ourselves. Our culture is teaching us, and probably our parents and the media are teaching us, lead yourself. Don't be led by anyone else. Don't get stuck with religion where they'll tell you what to do. But you should be your own government, and you'll be free if you follow your own desires. But that too, I would suggest, is a robber, is a thief. It's not how it's supposed to be. You're climbing over the wall if you're trying to lead yourself. I know the metaphor's starting to get pretty mixed up at that point. But to be self-led is to be in slavery to the smallness of yourself. And Jesus is the one that has come from the Father to us, and he is the one that has entered properly as the proper leader. He hasn't snuck in by some kind of 21st century Western philosophy that says all you could ever want will be led from inside. Jesus comes to you from the side of the Father and offers himself as the rightful leader. And this is the first way that Jesus will shepherd you, by his providence, that he is from the Father. He is the one that you ought to follow. And he is the one that will not steal from you, but will give you life. The second way that Jesus is the good shepherd is there in verses 4 and verses 9 and 10 and 12. And it's that he is the one who will lead us to goodness, and he will protect us from evil. Listen again, verse 4. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep will follow him. Verse 9. They will come in and go out and find pasture. So beautiful. Verse 10, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Verse 12, the hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. In these verses, we see that Jesus says, I will lead you to goodness, and I will protect you from evil in the way that hired shepherds, hired attendants won't protect you from evil. I'm saying that this metaphor of being a shepherd is about Jesus actually taking you to places and to things and to situations in your life that are good and keeping you from evil. Now, it's my experience that he is not afraid to take you into a valley, a dark valley, just like Psalm 23 says. There will be dark valleys and there will be wolves around. That seems to be in the metaphor, seems to be just the basic setting, that there are dangers. And it's not that Jesus will teach you to be a brave sheep. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because Jesus taught me to be strong. It's not what it says. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of evil and death, I will fear no evil, because your rod and your staff comfort me. They're not scared, not because they're stupid. They're not scared because Jesus is with them, these sheep, and his rod, his power to protect from evil is there. And so Christians have the strange experience of going into all sorts of dark valleys, but with the rod and the staff of their shepherd. There's so many ideas that will float around, and particularly will float around from your parents or from your boss or from the influences that do influence you, and particularly from yourself. There's so many ideas about what constitutes the good life. Home ownership, a career like this, like them, marriage and a romantic partner, family life with children, food experiences, holiday experiences. People will lead you to long for the good life and their version of it. But none of these will satisfy, because they're not the rightful shepherds. All those will take from you and will not give you life and will not protect you from evil. Instead, Jesus will lead us to good, and Jesus will protect us from evil. Hear his words again in John 10, I have come that you might have life abundantly. Thirdly, the third way that Jesus is a good shepherd, is the good shepherd, is that he will lead you with his voice. Verse 3, the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and the sheep will follow him because they know his voice, but they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. It's quite ironic. He's saying, my sheep will hear my voice. And verse 6, the Pharisees didn't understand what he was telling them. They're currently not his sheep. Third way that Jesus will lead like a shepherd is by his voice. Jesus speaks. Jesus is speaking now, and he is speaking to you. And a key experience of the Christian life is to be led in the truth of what Jesus has said and is saying to you now. He's resurrected and he's speaking now. Now, I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but I've decided to make that point 3, the topic of my sermon next week, partly because I want to make sure this is a shorter sermon, but also I just think it'd be great to spend the whole sermon next week thinking about what is it to be led by the voice of Jesus. And I want you to think this week, are you someone who is led by the voice of Jesus? And to preview next week without giving it, I'm not going to suggest that you ought to have an emotional, audible experience of Jesus' voice in your head or you're not a Christian. That's not what I'm saying. But does his word feature in a living and active way in your life? I would say it does. Are you listening is the real question. Are you making space to listen and to be led by him? Are you maybe making space and listening to be led by him, but are you being obedient to his word and following where he said is good and following him into the valley if he says this is where we're going today? Third point for today, though, is the perfect imperfection of the metaphor. The metaphor doesn't work, or at least it's not quite perfect, because Jesus says the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, or later in the passage, he says, verse 17, 18, I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up. Or back up in verses 10, 11. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I would suggest you're a bad shepherd if you lay down your life for the sheep. The sheep are really just there to make sure that either you have dinner or someone else has dinner and you get paid. But this shepherd, and I mean, a good shepherd would probably protect his sheep, but a good shepherd would not lay down his life that the sheep will live. The sheep exist for him. And so the metaphor breaks down here. because Jesus has something deeper and richer to say, that he is even more than a shepherd. He is the one who sees us in the dark valley and runs into the dark valley and dies for us to rescue us from the sin that we've gotten our nose into and that's gotten into our hearts. It's amazing truth here in the middle of his amazing metaphor that this is a shepherd who would lay down his life for you. And so, what I want to say is, don't miss the plainest of metaphors that Jesus uses, the figure of speech that's so simple. I'm a shepherd. I'm the shepherd. And don't miss following him, going where he leads, and listening to him and saying no thanks to the other voices, the other kind of words in our lives. Actively running away from those voices, as Jesus says, and running to the voice of Jesus. Are you a wise enough sheep to know when you hear a message that's not true? To see, I think most of us can see through most influences, I think, the kind that we have in our mind that kind of, it's all glam and glitz. We see through it. But are you seeing through the other leadership messages in your life that say, this is good for your soul, this is where you should rest your soul, and run instead to the voice of Jesus? Jesus is trustworthy. He's the shepherd who will lay down his life for you, and he's the shepherd who can come through the other side of the darkness of death. He says, I take up my life again. This is his resurrection. Jesus is safe because you can trust his motives. He would die for you. He did die for you. And he is safe because you can trust his power. He's not just the dying shepherd, but the one who has power over death and rises to new life. And so I invite you this morning to place your faith in Jesus, the good shepherd, and to follow him where he leads this week. He is alive and leading us now.